The streets of Manchester, New Hampshire, were cold that evening. A sharp February wind cut through the city, sending people hurrying into coffee shops, their collars pulled up against the chill. But one man remained on the sidewalk, untouched by the urgency of the crowd. He sat on a folded piece of cardboard, his coat tattered, his boots barely held together by duct tape. In front of him was a small, handwritten sign. U.S. Army veteran, just trying to get back on my feet. Karoline Leavitt had just left a town hall event, her mind still buzzing with the energy of the night. The conversations with voters, the discussions about policy, this was what she thrived on. But as she stepped outside and the brisk air hit her, her attention was pulled to the man sitting a few feet away from the entrance. Most people walked past him without a second glance. A few tossed change into the small cup at his feet. But something about him made Karoline stop. Maybe it was the way he held himself, not slumped over in despair, but upright, as if still standing at attention even while sitting on the cold concrete. Or maybe it was the haunted look in his eyes, a look she had seen before in the faces of veterans struggling to transition back to civilian life. She approached him, pulling off her gloves and tucking them into her coat pocket. "Hey there," she said, crouching to his level. "Mind if I sit for a bit?" The man looked up at her, surprised. His weathered face, lined with deep creases, spoke of hardship. He studied her for a moment before nodding. "It's a free country," he muttered. Karoline sat down beside him on the cold sidewalk, ignoring the looks from passers-by. "My name's Karoline," she said, offering her hand. "Mike," he replied, shaking it. His grip was strong, firm. Military training never truly left a person. She glanced at his sign. "Army, huh? How long did you serve?" 15 years, he said, his voice carrying the weight of every single one. 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. Got out in 2014. Thought I'd have it all figured out by now, but things don't always go as planned. Karoline nodded. She had spoken with veterans before, too many of whom had similar stories. "What happened?" she asked, keeping her voice gentle. Mike exhaled, his breath visible in the cold air. "Lost my job a year ago. Construction work. My back shot, old injury flaring up again. VA's been slow, rent piled up, and before I knew it..." He gestured around him. "Here I am." Karoline's chest tightened. She had fought for veterans' rights, but seeing the impact firsthand made it personal. "You got family around?" she asked. Mike hesitated. "A daughter," he admitted. "She's 17 now. Lives with her mom in Vermont. We talk sometimes, but I don't want her to see me like this." A silence stretched between them, filled only by the noise of the city. Karoline felt an ache in her heart. This wasn't just a policy issue. This was a father, a soldier, someone who had once served his country, now left behind. "Mike," she said, her voice firm. "I don't have all the answers, but I know one thing, you don't have to do this alone." He scoffed lightly, looking away. "People say that all the time. Then they walk off. I'm not walking off." She pulled out her phone. "Look, there's a Veterans Assistance Program downtown. I know the guy who runs it. They help with housing, medical care, getting you back on your feet. Let me call him." Mike hesitated. Years of disappointment had made him wary of hope. But something in her eyes, determined, unwavering, made him nod. "All right," he said quietly. Karoline smiled. "Good. First step, Mike. We'll get you out of this." As she dialed the number, she knew this wouldn't be easy. But she also knew she wasn't about to let another veteran be forgotten. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Tom Richards speaking." "Tom, it's Karoline," she said, standing up to move a few steps away from Mike so he wouldn't hear the desperation in her voice. "I need a favor." "Big one." There was a brief pause on the line. "What kind of favor?" "I'm here with a veteran, name's Mike. He's been homeless for a while. Army guy, 15 years in, multiple deployments. He's got an injury that's keeping him from working, and he's stuck in the VA backlog. He needs help, Tom." She could hear Tom exhale on the other end. He had spent the last decade running a veterans assistance nonprofit, but he never had enough resources to go around. You know the drill, Karoline. Beds are tight, funding's tight. Hell, everything's tight. She turned back to Mike, who was watching her carefully, his expression unreadable. Tom, she said, lowering her voice, I know the system's a mess. But I also know if we don't help him, he'll be out here another night in the cold. And another. Until something worse happens. You tell me, what's the alternative? Another long pause. Finally, Tom muttered, All right. Bring him in. I'll find a way to make room. Karoline closed her eyes briefly, relieved. You're a lifesaver, Tom. We're on our way. She hung up and turned back to Mike. Come on, let's get you inside. Mike hesitated, gripping the edges of his old coat like he wasn't sure whether to move or not. I don't want to be someone's charity case. It's not charity, she said firmly. You served your country. You earned this help. For a moment, he didn't respond. But then, slowly, he nodded. All right. She helped him to his feet, noticing the stiffness in his movements, the way he winced as he stood. His back was worse than he had let on. Where we going? He asked. Veterans Outreach Center downtown, she replied. They'll help get you set up with shelter, food, and medical support. And from there, we'll work on something long-term. Mike let out a short, almost bitter laugh. Long-term? I haven't thought that far ahead in a while. Then let's change that, she said. The ride to the center was quiet. Karoline had offered to call an Uber, but Mike had refused, saying he didn't mind the walk. She suspected it was more about pride than practicality. She didn't push. As they reached the small brick building that housed the Veterans Outreach Center, Mike slowed his steps. You sure about this? He muttered. Positive. She pushed open the door, and the warmth inside was immediate. The scent of coffee and disinfectant filled the air, and a group of men sat around a table in the corner, playing a slow game of chess. A man in his late 50s, with silver hair and a strong build, approached them. Tom Richards. Is this him? Tom asked, glancing at Mike. This is him, Karoline confirmed. Tom studied Mike for a moment, his sharp eyes taking in the worn coat, the tired stance, the hesitation in his expression. You hungry? Tom asked. Mike nodded. Good. Let's get you some food first, and then we'll talk next steps. Mike followed him toward the back, but before disappearing, he turned back to Karoline. Thanks, he said quietly. She gave him a small smile. You're not alone anymore, Mike. As she watched him walk away, she knew this was just the start of the battle. But at least, for the first time in a long time, he had a fighting chance. Mike ate like a man who hadn't had a warm meal in weeks. Because, as he admitted between bites, he hadn't. Tom sat across from him at the small dining area of the Veterans Outreach Center, sipping coffee while Karoline leaned against the wall, listening. You're lucky she found you, Tom said, gesturing toward Karoline with his mug. Most guys I meet out there don't get a second chance. Mike swallowed a mouthful of soup, his jaw tight. Yeah, well, didn't think I'd be one of those guys to begin with. Karoline folded her arms. Nobody does. Silence stretched between them for a moment, filled only by the sound of a clock ticking on the far wall. So, what's the plan? Mike asked finally, looking between them. Tom exhaled and set his mug down. First, we get you a place to sleep that isn't a sidewalk. We've got a temporary shelter spot for the next few nights. After that, I'll pull some strings, see if we can get you into one of the longer-term housing programs. There's a place in Concord, small apartments, but decent. Mike's shoulders tensed. I don't want to take a spot from someone who needs it more. Cut the crap, Tom said flatly. You need it. Karoline smirked at the bluntness, but Mike just looked down at his hands. Yeah, he muttered. I guess I do. You got any ID on you? Tom asked. Mike pulled out a worn wallet and slid a tattered military ID across the table. Driver's license is expired. Haven't had an address to renew it. Tom nodded, flipping it over. We'll work on that too. Without ID, getting benefits is like pulling teeth. Karoline shifted her weight, knowing this was where things got messy. And what about VA claims? Mike let out a breath through his nose. Been trying. I put in a disability claim last year for my back. Got a rejection letter 3 months later. They said there wasn't enough medical evidence. Problem is, I can't get more medical evidence without seeing a damn doctor, and I can't see a doctor without an address, ID, or money, Karoline finished for him. He nodded grimly. Tom sighed. Same story I hear every day. Good news is, I know a guy who works at the VA office downtown. He's a pain in the ass, but he owes me a favor. We'll get your case reopened. Mike looked at him skeptically. Just like that? Tom smirked. Not just like that. It'll take some pushing, but we'll get it done. Karoline saw something flicker in Mike's expression, something close to hope. But just as quickly as it appeared, it vanished. And work? He asked. Because I can't just sit around waiting for paperwork to go through. Tom rubbed his chin. With your back injury, you're not getting back into construction. But there are other options. Security jobs, desk work at a VA office, even some apprenticeship programs for vets looking to start fresh. Got a preference? Mike hesitated. Not really. Just need to be useful again. Karoline spoke up. You are useful, Mike. You just need a chance. His jaw tightened, but he nodded. Guess we'll see. Tom stood, clapping a hand on Mike's shoulder. Come on. Let's get you settled for the night. Mike rose from the table, glancing at Karoline. You heading out? She nodded. For now. But I'll be checking in. He gave a small, tired smile. Appreciate it. As Tom led Mike down the hall toward the temporary sleeping quarters, Karoline stayed behind for a moment, letting out a slow breath. This was just the start. But at least now, Mike wasn't facing it alone. A week later, Karoline walked into the Veterans Outreach Center, bracing herself for what she might find. She had been checking in on Mike through Tom, but today she wanted to see for herself. Progress in situations like his was rarely linear. Some guys took the help, others disappeared back onto the streets. She wasn't sure which way this would go. The moment she stepped inside, she saw him. Mike sat at a table near the front desk, flipping through a stack of paperwork. He looked cleaner, his scruffy beard trimmed, and he wore a donated winter coat that actually fit him. His hands, still rough and calloused, were steady as he filled out forms. Tom noticed her first. Leavitt, he called. Didn't think you'd be back so soon. Karoline smirked. I told you, I check in. Mike looked up then, his expression one of mild surprise. Didn't think you meant it, he admitted. She pulled out a chair across from him. How's it going? He exhaled, running a hand over his face. Busy. Tom's got me drowning in paperwork, but he's got me a spot in that housing program in Concord. Just gotta finalize some details. That's great, Mike, she said, genuinely relieved. Yeah, he muttered. Still don't feel real. Tom leaned against the counter. What did I tell you? One step at a time. And speaking of steps, he's got a job interview tomorrow. Karoline raised an eyebrow. Really? Mike shrugged. Security gig. Nothing fancy, but it's a start. It's more than a start, she said. It's a new chapter. He didn't argue, but she could tell he wasn't ready to believe in a happy ending just yet. VA benefits? She asked. Tom snorted. Still a mess. But we got his case reopened, and with the right documentation, he's got a shot at getting disability approval. Not holding my breath, Mike muttered. Karoline tilted her head. Don't give up yet. You made it this far. He studied her for a long moment. Why'd you stop for me? She blinked at the sudden question. What do you mean? People walk past me every day, he said. Some drop a few bucks, some don't even look at me. But you sat down. Why? Karoline hesitated, then said, Because I refuse to accept that this is just the way things are. You fought for this country. The least I could do was fight for you. Mike was quiet for a moment, then gave a small nod. Well, thanks. She smiled. You don't have to thank me. Just keep moving forward. Mike exhaled, glancing at the papers in front of him. I'll try. Tom clapped him on the shoulder. That's all we ask. As Karoline stood to leave, she felt something shift in the air. A week ago, Mike was sitting on the sidewalk, barely holding on. Now, he had a bed, a job interview, and a second chance. And for the first time, she believed he'd take it.